On a sunny afternoon in late spring, I first arrived at Rivercrest Estates, a suburban development renowned for its manicured lawns and ornate front porches. The houses and townhomes sprawled across gently rolling terrain, each boasting identical shutters and precisely edged flower beds. A stone plaque near the entrance read, Rivercrest Estates, where neighbors become friends. Soft jazz played over hidden outdoor speakers along the main boulevard, exuding an air of calm refinement. My newly purchased townhome was nestled in the southwestern corner of Rivercrest. I was drawn by the promises in the real estate brochure, a safe, welcoming neighborhood with an HOA dedicated to preserving property values and fostering a tight-knit community. Indeed, during the early days, I enjoyed the pristine walking paths, the well-maintained pool, and the friendly nods from residents I passed on my morning jogs. Yet, even as I settled in, I heard rumors of an HOA board member, Evelyn Mayfair, whose unofficial nickname was Karen. The name alone made me smile, but the more seasoned neighbors spoke in hushed tones about her. They described a woman in her mid-50s with perfectly coiffed shoulder-length hair, a penchant for pressed khaki capris, and a voice that could carry across a cul-de-sac. Some said that for every new resident who made a small misstep, like forgetting trash day or mismatching paint colors, Karen appeared, clipboard in hand, crisp at sunrise, ready to enforce the rules. I brushed off these accounts as neighborhood exaggerations. After all, how bad could it be? But Rivercrest Estates, with its uniform facades and sweetly trimmed hedges, hid an undercurrent of tension. And no story, I would soon learn, captured that tension better than the saga of Fiona Howard's Origami and Karen's subsequent rampage, a meltdown that shocked everyone, then unexpectedly inspired the entire community. Within a week, I encountered Evelyn Mayfair, the legendary Karen, in the communal garden by the clubhouse. She stood with a small cadre of acquaintances, wearing a pastel polo shirt, her hair impeccably styled. Her watchful gaze swept the hedges, the benches, and the few neighbors milling about. The second she spotted me, she locked on with a predatory smile. "Good afternoon," she called out, approaching. "I'm Evelyn Mayfair, head of Rivercrest Community Standards Committee." She extended a manicured hand. "Most folks around here are too casual. They forget we're not just any neighborhood, but an exclusive enclave. So we must preserve its caliber." Her tone brimmed with authority. After quickly introducing myself, I attempted a friendly remark about the lovely weather. She brushed off small talk, instead rattling off guidelines. Trash bins must be out only from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. on collection day. No planters on windowsills without prior approval. And do read the monthly bulletins. I write them myself. I nodded politely. My gut told me she relished these lectures, as though maintaining Rivercrest's standards was her sacred mission. Just then, her phone buzzed. I glimpsed a screenshot of an email she'd apparently flagged, referencing a complaint about clutter in the community lounge. She tooted. "We'll address that," she murmured, swiftly tucking her phone back into her pocket. I continued on my way, uneasy but determined not to let her manner dampen my enjoyment of Rivercrest. Little did I know that the clutter from that email referred to a humble origami display made by a kindly elderly neighbor, someone who soon became dear to me and whose quiet hobby would spark an unforgettable neighborhood confrontation. I first met Fiona Howard when I noticed her struggling with a large grocery bag on the sidewalk near the clubhouse. She was in her late 70s, with gentle features and a perpetual twinkle in her eyes. Her short silver hair framed a warm smile. Fiona used a mobility scooter to get around, a necessity after a series of knee surgeries. I offered to carry her groceries home, and she graciously accepted. Despite her physical limitations, Fiona exuded a peaceful optimism. Along the way, we fell into easy conversation. I discovered that she lived alone. Her husband had passed away years ago, and her children lived out of state. Fiona found solace in creative hobbies, notably origami. She spoke of it like a cherished friend. "Folding paper helps me focus and brings me joy," she explained. "Each crane or flower is a tiny piece of art I pour my heart into." When we reached her unit, she thanked me and offered me a glass of lemonade. That's when I saw her kitchen table covered in vibrant sheets of paper in various stages of folding. A row of intricate origami birds stood on a nearby shelf, delicate and precise. I've been folding origami for decades, Fiona said. It started as a stress reliever, but it's now my favorite pastime. Her eyes shone with pride. In subsequent weeks, I learned that Fiona's health challenges limited her mobility, so she found immense satisfaction in making small creations. Sometimes she'd gift them to neighbors. It's just my little way of sharing joy, she'd say. You can't look at a bright paper crane and stay grumpy. True enough, I found it impossible not to smile whenever she handed me a colorful piece shaped like a swan or a fox. Rivercrest Estates Community Lounge was a modest but pleasant space in the clubhouse, furnished with cozy chairs, small tables, and a corner bookshelf for casual reading. Residents gathered there for everything from bridge club to informal potlucks. Fiona, whose home could feel lonely, started bringing some of her origami to display on a side table, partly to brighten the lounge, partly to encourage social connection. She'd arrange a half-dozen cranes or flowers in a neat arrangement. Occasionally, if someone admired them, she'd invite them to take one home. The lounge soon gained a miniature gallery of her creations, a rotating display that changed every week or two. Fiona never intended to cause clutter. She limited her arrangement to a single side table, making sure not to block any walkway. And, by all accounts, residents found it charming. A neighbor confided to me that seeing Fiona's new designs each week felt like a little surprise. You never know what color combination she'll come up with next. However, one person stood apart in her assessment. Evelyn Mayfair saw Fiona's paper sculptures not as an endearing expression of creativity, but as an encroachment on communal decor guidelines. Indeed, the mention of clutter in the lounge that I saw on Evelyn's phone hinted that she already regarded these harmless origami pieces as a potential nuisance. Still, for months, it remained a silent standoff, Fiona quietly adding her modest display, and Karen glaring whenever she passed by the lounge. Fiona sensed some disapproval but shrugged it off. She believed her single tabletop hardly violated any rules, especially since the lounge was meant for communal enjoyment. She had no inkling how far Evelyn would go to assert control. Small hints of Evelyn's building resentment began surfacing. In the monthly HOA bulletin, authored by Evelyn, a subtle note appeared. Residents are reminded not to leave personal items or decor in communal areas without explicit permission from the Community Standards Committee. No one was mentioned by name, yet it was clear who the target was. A few neighbors teased Fiona lightly. "Oh, might want to watch out with those paper animals," but she'd just smile and dismiss it. "It's hardly a hazard," she'd say. "People like them." Confident that no one had directly confronted her, she continued her routine. But behind the scenes, Evelyn was gathering ammunition. She apparently lodged multiple complaints about unapproved decorations and paper litter in official board records. The rest of the HOA board, comprised of more easygoing volunteers, dismissed them as trivial. They figured if the lounge users weren't bothered, it wasn't worth fighting over. That only heightened Evelyn's frustration. I caught a glimpse of her hostility one afternoon, hearing raised voices by the lounge door. I peeked in. Evelyn stood with arms folded, scolding a timid teenage girl who'd picked up one of Fiona's paper cranes. "We can't have random junk lying around," Evelyn snapped. "It sets a precedent. Next thing you know, people will dump newspapers and menus. Then the lounge is trashed." The teen was taken aback, mumbling that she thought it was a free gift. Evelyn curtly waved her off. Stepping away before she spotted me, I felt a chill. Was the presence of a few folded papers truly that offensive? Evelyn seemed fixated on controlling every detail of Rivercrest life. While some might dismiss her as a control freak, it was a sign that Fiona's small acts of kindness were about to clash head-on with a formidable force. Everything came to a head on a breezy Tuesday morning. I walked into the clubhouse around 9 a.m., planning to use the free Wi-Fi to handle some remote work. As soon as I entered the lounge, I froze at the sight in front of me. Shredded paper lay scattered across the floor. Bright scraps, once part of colorful origami, littered the side table, the chairs, the rug. The neat display Fiona had arranged the day before, intricate cranes, lotus flowers, and a paper turtle, was in ruins. It looked like a small tornado of confetti had blown through. But the savage tears suggested human hands, not accidental mishandling. Strangely, a faint chemical smell lingered in the air, perhaps from a cleaning agent, or maybe just from frantically tearing coated paper. My heartbeat quickened. Who would do such a thing? Fiona's creations were harmless pieces of art, admired by many. Shock turned to anger as I realized this had to be deliberate vandalism. A housekeeping staff member hurried in behind me, eyes wide in alarm. "What happened here?" she gasped, kneeling to gather the fragments. Meanwhile, the lounge door banged open, and in strode Evelyn Mayfair. She surveyed the carnage, pursing her lips. Rather than alarm, her expression was eerily smug. A flicker of triumph crossed her features before she schooled it into a mask of concern. I confronted her. "Did you see who did this?" I asked. She shrugged, feigning innocence. "No, but it was bound to happen, wasn't it? So many scraps lying around. Somebody must have decided enough was enough." Just then, Fiona rolled up in her scooter. She'd apparently planned to add a new swan to the display. Her face went pale at the scattered remains of her creations. "Wah!" Her voice quivered, eyes darting across the room. Why would anyone destroy them? In that moment, Evelyn stepped forward, raising her voice with an edge of scorn. "Stop dumping paper on us," she exclaimed. "The lounge is not your personal craft studio." Then, as if to punctuate her point, she kicked a stray scrap aside with her shoe. Fiona looked gutted, tears welling. Speechless, she stared at the confetti of her handiwork. I tried to speak up, to protest, but the shock of Evelyn's blatant cruelty left me momentarily stunned. Fiona's trembling hands rose to her face, muffling a sob. The housekeeping staff member placed a consoling arm on Fiona's shoulder. A hush fell over the lounge, broken only by the scraping noise of Evelyn adjusting a chair, as though nothing of consequence had occurred. News of Karen, Evelyn Mayfair's meltdown spread through Rivercrest Estates with lightning speed. Within hours, nearly everyone knew that Fiona Howard's beloved origami creations had been torn to shreds in the community lounge, presumably by none other than Evelyn, who had openly crowed about junk and paper dumping. The shocking cruelty of the act jarred neighbors who previously assumed Evelyn's worst trait was mild meddling. Many responded with anger or dismay. Some wrote outraged posts in the residents-only Facebook group, condemning such destructive behavior. One retiree, Mr. Lazarus, posted, "I might not always appreciate random decor, but this was an act of pure cruelty. Fiona's art harmed no one." Others expressed heartbreak on Fiona's behalf. It wasn't just the physical destruction. She had poured weeks of careful effort into those folded creations. Fiona, too distraught to speak at length that day, stayed in her home. A steady trickle of supportive neighbors dropped by, bringing small gifts or flowers, hoping to lift her spirits. She was grateful but devastated. She confided in me that she'd never believed someone could hate her passion so vehemently. "I just wanted to share a bit of color," she whispered. Evelyn, meanwhile, attempted to spin the story. She claimed the lounge was cluttered and violated guidelines, and that someone had drastically cleaned it up. She never outright admitted to personally shredding the origami, though her defiant comments at the scene and the consistent accounts from those who overheard her strongly suggested her direct involvement. The few neighbors who tried to defend her on the official HOA forum found themselves shouted down by an outraged majority. Thus, the neighborhood pivoted from mild discontent to a near-universal outcry. Rivercrest's veneer of peace was shattered by an incident so petty yet painfully malicious. The question now, would the HOA board hold Evelyn accountable, or would her status as head of community standards shield her? And how would Fiona recover from such a blow to her gentle spirit? Following the destruction of Fiona's origami, outraged neighbors demanded an emergency HOA meeting. Many felt the rules-based system, ironically championed by Evelyn, should apply to her as well. Vandalism, even of paper art, was unacceptable. Some proposed a formal censure or removal from her committee post. Others insisted on a public apology. When the HOA board convened that Friday evening in the clubhouse, tensions were high. Dozens of residents crammed into folding chairs. Fiona arrived in her scooter, eyes downcast but determined. I sat beside her, ready to speak if she needed support. At the front table, the board president, Ms. Loretta Reeves, tried to maintain order. "We have a serious matter tonight," she said, referencing the widespread condemnation of the lounge incident. Evelyn Mayfair sat stiffly to Ms. Reeves's left, arms folded. She wore a calm, slightly aloof expression, as though these proceedings were a needless bother. Neighbors took turns airing grievances, from heartbreak over Fiona's loss to disgust at the brazen disregard for kindness. More than one resident referenced Evelyn's ongoing hostility toward unapproved decor. Some read from the official HOA guidelines, pointing out nothing barred small artistic displays so long as they didn't block exits or create hazards. Fiona's tabletop arrangement had never been an official violation. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice dripping with condescension. She repeated her refrain. These paper trinkets were left in a communal space without board authorization. They piled up. The lounge was losing its appeal. She shrugged as if to say, I only enforced the rules. She never outright admitted to ripping them up. She phrased it as someone cleared them out for safety reasons. Yet her smug tone implied she believed her actions justified. Ms. Reeves looked uneasy. She tried to reason that even if the origami had broken a minor rule, it didn't warrant outright destruction. Evelyn rolled her eyes, retorting, It's just paper. Let's not blow this out of proportion. Gasps rippled through the room. Clearly, she remained unrepentant. By the meeting's end, the board promised a formal investigation and a subsequent special session to decide if Evelyn had violated the HOA code of conduct. But no immediate disciplinary action was taken. Many left frustrated, especially Fiona, who felt the system was too timid to stand up to Evelyn's bullying. Yet seeds of a more direct response began quietly brewing among neighbors. That evening, as neighbors gathered outside the clubhouse discussing the day's events, someone floated a heartfelt suggestion. What if we show Fiona she's not alone by rallying around her art? An older resident, Ms. Jenkins, proposed hosting a simple event dedicated to origami, like a show or expo, she said, where all her pieces can be appreciated and others can join in the fun. The idea sparked immediate enthusiasm. Another neighbor chimed in. We could make it bigger, invite folks to fold their own pieces, or ask local crafters to contribute. The excitement grew as people envisioned filling the lounge, or even a broader area of the clubhouse, with hundreds of paper creations, a bold statement that Fiona's art belonged in the community. Fiona, upon hearing the plan, initially demurred. I don't want to cause more conflict. But supporters insisted it wasn't about conflict. It was about celebrating her hobby and standing against small-minded destruction. As word spread, a grassroots effort blossomed. Social media posts. Residents posted in the Rivercrest Facebook group, inviting folks to learn origami from tutorials or come to casual folding sessions. Local crafters, some reached out to nearby craft stores and community centers, asking if anyone might donate or fold extra pieces in solidarity. Kids' workshops. A few parents volunteered to run a short class for kids in the lounge, teaching them to fold simple paper animals. A possible expo date. People began pitching a date, about 3 weeks away, for an origami expo and art gathering. The synergy was amazing. Even those who had never thought about origami grew eager to help. Watching neighbors coordinate rides for older folks or share PDF instructions for paper cranes was heartwarming. In a single night, the plan gained serious momentum. A quiet rebellion of color and creativity was forming, peaceful but resolute in countering Evelyn's negativity. In the weeks leading up to the planned Origami Expo, Evelyn Mayfair doubled down on her stance. She wrote an inflammatory piece in the HOA newsletter titled Maintaining Order in Shared Spaces. Without naming Fiona specifically, she railed against random personal items that degrade our refined atmosphere. She dropped ominous hints about visual pollution. The piece practically dripped with scorn, as if she were painting the entire community's blossoming art push as an assault on decency. In private, she allegedly confronted neighbors who displayed newly folded paper animals on their porches or near windows, accusing them of goading the board. She insisted any expansions of origami in public areas must be pre-approved. However, by now, her moral authority had eroded. Many residents privately referred to her as Karen, rolling their eyes at her demands. The tide of public opinion was firmly with Fiona. Still, Evelyn tried to portray herself as a defender of the rules. She refused to break character. If asked about the lounge incident, she offered ambiguous remarks like, I can't help if someone tidied up for hygiene reasons. Paper can carry germs. Every rational observer recognized her smokescreen for what it was. Yet she continued to clutch at straws, reluctant to accept that her bullying had sparked a neighborhood revolt. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Ms. Reeves and the HOA board were finalizing their investigation. Given Evelyn's official position, they were forced to follow a formal process. Rumors spread that some on the board wanted to remove her from the Community Standards Committee entirely. But to do so, they needed a clear majority vote at the next official meeting, which was scheduled suspiciously close to the same weekend as the Origami Expo. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. As neighbors prepared a celebration of creativity, the board inched toward a showdown over Evelyn's destructive act. As the expo date neared, excitement soared. Word had spread well beyond Rivercrest's gates. A local seniors center, hearing Fiona's story, rallied a group of their craft club members to fold origami and donate pieces to the expo. Even a few local high school art classes pitched in, using the event as an opportunity to practice folding techniques. By the final week, volunteers estimated they'd have hundreds, maybe over 1,000, paper creations to display. Fiona's sorrow gradually transformed into cautious joy. Still bruised by the memory of her shredded work, she found hope in the avalanche of support. She told me once, voice quivering, "I had no idea so many people cared about something as simple as folding paper." Gently, she resumed her own folding, producing new designs, elaborate flowers, tiny paper cats, and an entire fleet of colorful cranes. She planned to show them at the expo, representing the resilience of her passion. The big day was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon. The lounge and adjoining rec room would host the main displays. A neighbor who managed a local bakery volunteered cookies and pastries. Another planned to set up a table so guests could try folding simple pieces themselves. Kids were especially thrilled. Some had never attempted origami before. Evelyn, of course, was silent about the expo, refusing to acknowledge it officially. However, by that point, few cared for her approval. The unstoppable wave of communal goodwill overshadowed her negativity. Meanwhile, the board received a petition from over 100 residents, urging them to allow the expo unconditionally, to prove Rivercrest Estates stands for inclusivity and creativity. At last, the day arrived. Sunshine bathed Rivercrest Estates in a cheerful glow, as if nature itself blessed the gathering. By noon, the rec room tables were blanketed with an astonishing array of origami, swirling dragons, delicate butterflies, modular geometric shapes, paper roses. Fiona's corner featured a handmade sign, "Our Paper Dreams," a celebration of origami and community. She oversaw it from her scooter, beaming at every new piece that arrived. Attendees poured in. Parents with toddlers, older couples, single neighbors with cameras. Everyone marveled at the explosion of color. The lounge, once the scene of heartbreak, now burst with positivity. At one station, a volunteer demonstrated how to fold a classic crane. At another, a small group chatted over tea and pastries, comparing notes on folding techniques. I watched as residents who'd barely known each other now bonded over the delight of turning a flat sheet of paper into something magical. High school students, wearing t-shirts emblazoned with Paper Art Team, proudly contributed a massive collage of interconnected origami patterns. A hush fell when they unveiled a special tribute. A dozen paper lilies arranged to spell Fiona across one table, an acknowledgement of the woman whose passion had sparked it all. And Fiona? She glowed with gratitude, tears slipping down her cheeks whenever someone presented a new creation or shared words of encouragement. "I never dreamed it could become this big," she told me at one point, voice trembling. "Thank you all." Yet the highlight came mid-afternoon, when a swirl of neighbors placed a giant cluster of paper cranes along the lounge's main window. Maybe 300 in total, strung on fishing line so they dangled in a mesmerizing mobile. Each crane, folded by a different individual, symbolized unity. Children pointed excitedly, a few seniors dabbed at their eyes, and applause burst forth spontaneously. No one spoke it aloud, but the meaning was clear. This was a direct rebuke to the hatred that once destroyed Fiona's art. Now, in that very lounge, 1,000 paper wonders thrived. As the Origami Expo winded down, neighbors began discussing how to preserve the moment. Many found it tragic to think that after this triumphant day, the pieces would disappear back into boxes. Ms. Reeves, the board president, had a sudden idea. What if we install a permanent glass case in the lounge? We could showcase a rotating selection of these pieces, reminding everyone of what we stand for. The suggestion met immediate acclaim. The next day, the board took an official vote, unanimously approving the installation of a glass display in one corner of the lounge. Its stated purpose was to celebrate resident art and creativity. They even allocated HOA funds to commission a local carpenter to build a tasteful, locked cabinet with shelves. Evelyn Mayfair was conspicuously absent from the discussion. Her seat at the table remained empty, as she'd chosen not to attend that particular meeting. Regardless, the motion passed. Within weeks, the cabinet was installed, a simple yet elegant piece with soft lighting, tall enough to exhibit dozens of origami sculptures. Fiona's heart soared when Ms. Reeves presented her with a small plaque, in honor of Fiona Howard's artistry and the community that rose to defend it. Tears brimmed in her eyes. She insisted the display remain open for any neighbor who wanted to contribute or rotate their own folded works. "This is bigger than me now," she said softly. "It's about all of us." Within days of its debut, passers-by in the lounge would pause, smiling at the bright menagerie behind the glass. Origami pieces from across Rivercrest found a home inside, reminding onlookers that from one act of cruelty, an entire wave of beauty and solidarity had blossomed. Around this time, the HOA board released the findings from their formal inquiry into the lounge incident. While no security camera had definitively captured Evelyn shredding the origami, multiple eyewitnesses testified to her words and actions. Combined with her admission that she cleaned up and her public outburst, the board concluded she had violated Code of Conduct guidelines. She was stripped of her position on the Community Standards Committee and forbidden from unilaterally enforcing any rule. Evelyn's fall from grace was abrupt. Once revered, or at least feared, for her meticulous oversight, she found herself socially isolated. Some insisted she deserved any cold shoulder she received. Others suggested a path for redemption if only she'd apologize. Yet that apology never came. She retreated from public events, rarely speaking to neighbors unless necessary. For Fiona, meanwhile, life took an upswing. The community's support revived her confidence. She even began hosting small origami workshops in her living room, teaching neighbors new patterns. "It's amazing how much a little fold can convey," she'd say, demonstrating how a square of paper could transform into a graceful swan. The same lounge that once bore the scar of her destroyed pieces was now a hub of vibrant color and conversation. Observing this transformation, I couldn't help but reflect on the power of collective action. A single destructive act, fueled by arrogance and cruelty, had been neutralized and reversed by the empathy and creativity of neighbors. Rivercrest Estates might have looked perfect on the surface, but it was the resilience of its people that truly made it shine. Several months later, Rivercrest Estates felt tangibly different. The new glass display in the lounge was updated weekly, sometimes featuring a theme, paper koi fish, or holiday ornaments, or pastel flowers. Visitors from outside communities dropped by to admire the unusual exhibit, often leaving compliments in a small guest book. Meanwhile, residents who had never met Fiona now recognized her as the Origami Lady and greeted her warmly at the mailbox or while walking dogs. The annual Fall Festival, typically a time for pumpkin-themed events, included a special booth dedicated to origami. Families lined up to learn basic folds. Children trotted home with bright paper animals, proud to show them off. Fiona, in her scooter, oversaw the booth, joined by teenage volunteers who had become quite adept at folding themselves. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Just months earlier, the notion of paper clutter had spurred a neighbor's rage, yet now the entire community celebrated it. As for Evelyn Karen Mayfair, she remained in Rivercrest, living behind drawn shades. Some nights, I'd see her walking alone, passing the lounge windows where the origami case glowed softly. On rare occasions, she'd pause, glancing at the flock of paper cranes perched on the top shelf. Her expression was hard to decipher, a mix of regret, defensiveness, or perhaps wonder. But she never stepped inside to view them up close. If there was a moral to glean, it was that small gestures, like folding paper into birds, can bring out both the best and worst in people. Cruelty may cause heartbreak, but kindness can triumph if enough hearts unite behind it. Thanks to Fiona's courage and the neighbors' support, Rivercrest Estates evolved into a more compassionate, more vibrant place than before. And in the hush of the lounge, the rainbow of delicate shapes, safe behind glass, quietly affirmed, a single destructive voice cannot overshadow a chorus of creative spirits.